Before we get into the first murders that King Von was allegedly involved in, I just want to take the time to consider the real reasons why he would be motivated to kill in the first place. Despite covering a lot of gangsters who are hardened killers, it's important to consider the social circumstances that need to exist for a teenage boy to start committing murders. Firstly, these areas where King Von grew up in Southside Chicago, Killer Ward and O Block, are incredibly poor and dangerous areas, with the latter even being described by the local Sun-Times newspaper as the most dangerous block in Chicago. Part of the reason why so many of these gang murders in Chicago go unsolved is due to the failure of policing in these areas. Someone like King Von grew up seeing death and destruction as a completely normal thing, and if the police never come to your area to solve crimes or deliver justice, it's easy to see why you would place more trust in street justice than in the state. Furthermore, you really have to ponder whose fault is it really that somewhere like O Block ended up being so poor and dangerous. While it's easy to blame the gangsters and killers there for cultivating a lawless environment, the city and the state politicians ultimately have failed to create the economic circumstances for someone to grow up safely in these areas. Had there been better economic prospects in the hoods of Chicago, perhaps many of these young men wouldn't have been forced into a life of crime and violence. Furthermore, when it comes to the analysis of King Von's eventual transformation into what some have described as a serial killer, there's actually an argument to be made that geography may have played a part in King Von feeling like he could get away with so many murders. The 70s to the 2000s have actually been described as the golden age of serial murder, and one possible cause for this phenomenon around this period has been cited as urbanization and the concentration of inner city living. Some people have said that putting so many people in such close proximity ends up offering a unique level of anonymity when it comes to committing crimes in these complicated, busy and overpopulated areas. Put simply, this means that in O Block, the sheer amount of people, overlapping gang conflicts, and normalization of violence on the streets means that somebody like King Von could kill multiple people without attracting too much attention to him personally. As sad as it is to say, in the eyes of the cops, a victim is just another casualty of the gang war rather than a specific crime that could be solved. And it's these circumstances that were the perfect conditions for a young King Von to begin killing people in his community with minimal consequences. And whilst King Von was in jail, gun violence had raged on between the Black Disciples from Wick City and the rival Gangster Disciples from St. Lawrence and Eberhart Avenues, or STL-EBT. And during this time, whilst King Von was incarcerated, a 15-year-old gangster disciple from the rival hood by the name of Tuka was murdered. Real name Shondale Gregory, Tuka was shot dead at a bus stop on the 600 block of East 63rd Street on the 12th of January 2011 at around 6:48 PM. It was around that time that a masked gunman jumped out of a vehicle, shooting Tuka several times. Tuka was hated by his rivals from the Black Disciples, and over the next decade, BDs would continue to disrespect him on social media and in popular songs. And in honor of their fallen friend, Gangster Disciples from St. Lawrence and Eberhart would rename their area Tukaville. It's never been fully revealed to the public who killed Tuka, but ever since, there has been intense speculation that a boy named O.D. Perry from Wick City might have had something to do with it. This is partly due to him being pictured regularly with a silver revolver, and the witness report from the Tuka murder stated that Tuka was actually shot with a long-barreled silver revolver. Regardless of whether or not O.D. was really the person who killed Tuka, that didn't really matter, because later that year, on August the 10th, 2011, in an act of retaliation, O.D. Perry was killed just outside Parkway Gardens. He would suffer multiple gunshot wounds, including one to the neck, at about 11:35 PM. Just like Tukaville, Wick City was also renamed in the memory of their fallen friend O.D., O Block, and it's believed that one of the shooters who killed O.D. was a female teenage shooter by the name of Jakira Barnes, or K.I. Following the murder, K.I. would begin to pose on social media with a silver revolver, similar to the one that O.D. was known to carry, and her rumoured involvement in this murder of a beloved O Block member would lead to K.I. becoming a major target herself, with matters not helped by the fact that she would regularly tweet insulting O.D. Perry and alluding to having killed him, along with others who would openly claim that K.I. made the O, meaning that she killed O.D. and was the one that caused Wick City to change the name of their block to O Block. But the tragedies in O Block were far from over. On the 18th of October 2011, another O Block native by the name of Patoon, real name Edward Riley, would be shot dead inside O Block after being approached by two people with firearms. Another devastating loss to the community would come when 19-year-old Sherroyd Liggins would be shot in the head and left for dead on February the 16th, 2012, also at O Block. This murder was particularly notable for the fact that it was believed that Sherroyd was killed by a Tukaville shooter by the name of Boss Trell. As the gang war in his neighbourhood continued to take more and more of his friends' lives, King Von would get more and more involved, continuing to play a role in the gang war going on in Chicago's street underworld. Von later rapped on the song Don't Want to Be Me that everything changed for him in 2012, and that this is when he decided to get more active in the gang war. with Von saying specifically that the deaths of OD and Platoon completely changed his plans and led him to put on a mask and get active in the gang war. Now, there's a lot of speculation about the exact murders that Von was allegedly involved in, and we might never know definitively if he was truly involved in all the violence that he was rumoured to be associated with, but the very first murder that Von was associated with took place on April the 28th, 2012, when a group of 4 men would catch a man called King Doc, real name Marlon Monroe, shooting him as he walked into a convenience store, with Doc apparently stumbling into a patch of tall weeds after the shooting, where he would pass away and lay undiscovered for hours. Doc would eventually be found dead by his 16-year-old cousin, Modell McCambry. Doc would be remembered as an original native of St. Lawrence and Eberhart Avenues, with his affiliation to the area likely the reason that the killers from O-Block would target him, despite the fact that Doc had apparently left the gang life behind him, becoming a painter to get out of the streets. Apparently hurt by the death of his cousin, Modell, that boy who discovered Doc's body, would then begin to get more involved in the gangs in the area too, beginning to hang around with people like KI and FBG Duck, as well as being seen on social media with guns. In fact, it's actually around this time that social media begins to play a bigger and bigger role in the gang war in Chicago. And during this time, King Von himself would become a prolific user of Twitter, beginning a flurry of activity on the platform after signing up in June 2012, and going on to tweet constantly about his activities in the streets, seemingly with no fear about incriminating himself. Von would openly claim to be drilling in the name of O.D. Perry. He would say that he was like Phineas and Ferb in the streets with his best friend and fellow O-Block shooter T-Roy, warning ops not to diss them, claiming to shoot people like it's nothing. He would tweet that he's been drilling from young and even wants to kill cops too. He would say outright that he will whack people. He would regularly diss numerous rival hoods and gangs, and be claiming to be paranoid due to having so many people trying to kill him. Von claimed on Twitter to get so enraged whenever he hears the name Tuca or St. Lawrence that his trigger finger just starts itching. But during this time that Von was tweeting openly about all the crimes that he was willing to do in the streets, these crimes would continue to play out. On August the 7th, 2012, Von would make a tweet saying that homicide is in the air and that it smells like a graveyard. Then, in the early hours of the morning the following day, on August the 8th, 2012, a group of guys from O-Block, rumoured to include King Von and T-Roy, would be out looking for enemies to kill. Dirty Rel, real name Terrell Joshua, an older member with affiliations to St. Lawrence, Eberhart, and Jarrow City, who had actually moved out of Chicago but was back in town, would end up being shot dead and found on a sidewalk on the first block of East 56th Street in Washington Park just before 3:30 AM. However, in this case, retaliation would come fast. As the day of August 8th, 2012 goes by, that same evening, around 11:30 PM, King Von is out with his close friend White White, real name Tony Dunn. They would go to a convenience store together on East 63rd Street and South Martin Luther King Drive. Here, Von would go inside the store whilst White White waited outside. At this point, a gunman pulls up, shooting White White in the back, with a police officer on the scene even returning fire and hitting the shooter, who ultimately managed to escape. White White would be pronounced dead in the early hours of the morning on August the 9th, 2012. This date just so happened to be King Von's 18th birthday. This was a devastating incident for Von, who would tweet numerous times about the murder of his friend Whitey, including this one where he said that he had just bought Whitey a pill and gone inside the store, only coming back outside to find a crowd surrounding his shot friend and at first believing that Whitey would be okay. After this, Von would tweet messages saying that this killing is what led him to act out, and in the days following, he would be pledging to kill his enemies publicly. Von later elaborated on his mindset around this period in his song Demon, saying outright that witnessing the death of his close friend Whitey on his 18th birthday is the exact thing that turned him into a demon. And Von would rap that after this, him and his right-hand man T-Roy would be doing hits back-to-back to avenge this tragic loss. Von would apparently be trying to kill much more ruthlessly after this, desperately wanting to get at rival shooters K.I. and Wooski, who had mocked White White's death on Twitter. In September 2012, King Von and others caught K.I. on the train, apparently beating her up and mocking her on Twitter in the aftermath. Von would eventually catch up with K.I. in much more deadly circumstances, but not for a couple of years. For now, he would continue to gangbang in the streets with his O-Block brothers like T-Roy, ultimately winding up implicated in numerous murders as he continued to seek revenge for the murder of White White, and one body at a time, building up a fearsome reputation as one of O-Block's most ruthless killers. I hope you enjoyed that clip. If you did, hit that subscribe button. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at TraplawRoss on Instagram, and if you want full-length documentaries completely uncut, head on over to my Patreon, patreon.com/TraplawRoss. Appreciate it. Peace.